The sexual brutality of Genghis Khan did not erupt in chaos. It unfolded with precision, transforming an entire continent through calculated horror. Picture this: a dimly lit tent, thick with incense and dread. A young woman's hand trembles beneath embroidered silk. Beside her, the most powerful man alive breathes with the lazy satisfaction of a conqueror. She is one of thousands, but tonight she will be the last. Her fingers brush the cold iron hidden under her pillow. The storm outside swallows the sound of her shallow breath. She is a Tangut princess, a girl who watched her family burn alive 3 years ago, enduring countless nights of degradation while she waited for this single moment. The blade glints in candlelight as she raises it. In seconds, the great Khan, who claimed more women than any man in history, will learn that conquest carries consequences. The empire built on the violation of thousands is about to face judgment from its final victim. History will call it legend, but the screams that split that night were all too real. Yet to understand how one man's last moments ended in blood, we must go backward, to a wound buried deep in the steppe, to a single kidnapping that twisted a man's soul, and from his soul poisoned the bloodlines of 2 continents. It began in 1184. Genghis Khan was not yet the Great Khan. He was Temujin, just another young tribal leader struggling to survive the shifting politics of the Mongolian steppe. He had married Borte as a teenager, a match meant to cement fragile alliances. For a brief moment, her presence promised stability, but old debts never die. The Merkits, sworn enemies, remembered an insult carved into memory decades earlier: a woman stolen by Temujin's father. Their revenge came at dawn. 30 riders thundered into the camp. Temujin fled on horseback. His new bride did not. For the man who would one day break empires, that moment branded him forever. Borte was dragged into Merkit territory. There, she was claimed as property by a warrior named Chilgur. 8 months she endured captivity. The chronicles soften the words held, taken, kept. But the truth bleeds through the silence. When Temujin finally reclaimed her with the help of his blood brother Jamuha, she was heavily pregnant. The child she bore was named Jochi, the guest. The name itself announced his shadowed paternity to the world. Temujin declared him his son, but doubt gnawed at him. In quiet moments, his eyes searched the boy's face for Merkit features. But Borte's rescue was no salvation. It was a rupture. Temujin had saved his wife's body, but not her honor. And in the iron culture of the steppe, that dishonor spread like poison. Every sidelong glance at Jochi, every whispered doubt, was an echo of the sounds Temujin never heard, but could never stop imagining. The man who fled on horseback became something else, a man who would never run again. The Merkits paid first, not just the raiders who had taken Borte, but their entire people. Men, women, children, the elderly, no one was spared. Yet even slaughter was not enough. Temujin did not merely want them dead, he wanted them broken. To carry shame as he carried shame. To suffer as Borte had suffered. This was the pattern. Sexual violence would no longer be random cruelty, it would be policy. Every conquered tribe would be punished through its women. Every captured wife, every stolen daughter would balance the scales of Borte's humiliation. His generals understood. Temujin could not erase what had been done to his wife, so he would inscribe it on the world. He could not relive those 8 months, so he would steal lifetimes from others. In this way, trauma became empire. The man who once failed to protect one woman would possess thousands. The husband who lost control would seize control of the reproductive future of entire nations. Modern psychology has a word for this: the transformation of victimhood into domination. But no trauma in history metastasized on such a catastrophic scale. The irony cuts deepest here. In trying to overcome one woman's violation, Temujin became history's greatest violator. In attempting to erase shame, he manufactured humiliation that spanned continents. The victim became the ultimate perpetrator, magnifying his wound across millions of bodies. From the day Borte was rescued, Temujin never spoke of mercy again. Women were no longer people. They were spoils, possessions, living trophies. Conquest itself became not just military, but biological. He developed a philosophy. To dominate sexually was to dominate spiritually. Every forced pregnancy replaced an enemy's bloodline with Mongol blood. Rape was no longer atrocity, it was state policy, ethnic engineering disguised as vengeance. But such a philosophy required structure. Random violation could not traumatize a continent. It needed planning, organization, bureaucracy. The same genius that built the Mongol postal system, the arteries of empire, built the most efficient network of sexual slavery the world had ever seen. The scribes who recorded the numbers knew what they were writing was monstrous. One hand trembled as it etched the figure: 7,000. Not casualties, not tribute, not cattle, but women. 7,000 listed as the Khan's personal collection. Managing them required its own administration, and so the Mongols ranked women as they ranked horses, as they ranked soldiers. Efficiency applied to flesh. Beauty, age, virginity, lineage, each measured, each scored. A virgin princess might earn 95 points, a merchant's widow 60. The evaluations were not whispered, they were public. Naked bodies paraded in courtyards, officials circling with ledgers, their styluses scratching as they reduced humanity to numbers. The system was methodical, brutal, and it was only beginning. Open courtyards, naked bodies lined in rows, officials circling with ledgers in hand, styluses scratching wood with the same cold rhythm as an abacus. Human beings reduced to numbers. One survivor would later recall that sound, the dry scrape of styluses, louder than the wind. It was the sound of value being stripped away, of flesh converted into arithmetic. The work was efficient. Thousands to process, quotas to meet. Women scored like horses, tallied like livestock. A score above 90 meant one destination, the Khan himself. 80 meant reward, a gift for the generals who brought glory. 70 meant assignment to officers, 60 to the common soldiers. It was a sexual economy where women were not people but currency. And below 60, that number carried a different fate, one worse than death. The women who fell short were assigned to the mobile brothels that trailed every Mongol army. These were not chaotic camps of soldiers indulging in lawless violence. They were institutions, organized, scheduled, staffed. The same discipline that fueled Mongol conquest fueled this machine. Women stripped to the names, branded with numbers, their usage logged, their locations tracked. Records survive even now. Chinese archives filled with documents that read less like history than like shipping manifests. 20 Tangut maidens, scores 25 to 55, assigned to Regiment 4. Human trafficking, industrialized. The Mongols sorted by ethnicity as though sampling from a wine cellar. Russians in one corner, Persians in another. Chinese and Koreans divided again, each group valued for different qualities, as though experience itself could be cataloged by race.
a grotesque racial inventory of flesh. Infrastructure was immense. Special guards, distinct from regular troops, managed the women. Dedicated supply lines provided food, clothing, even rudimentary medical care. Not mercy, maintenance. Broken bodies could not serve. Pregnancies were recorded, offspring tracked. Wombs became ledgers. For those condemned to the brothel, survival was measured in days, sometimes hours. Dozens of men daily until the body failed. And when it failed, discarded, replaced. Efficiency demanded maximize usage, minimize maintenance. The lucky ones, those who scored higher, faced another nightmare. Exclusive ownership. A general's possession, a mobile palace that was nothing but a silken cage. Their lives measured by a single man's whims. And above all of them, the Khan's personal 7,000. 7,000 women organized like living trophies. Chinese beauties in one wing, Persian princesses in another, Russian nobles in a third. To walk through his gur, his vast tent complex, was to walk through a map of conquest drawn in stolen flesh. Managing such a harem required innovations, rotating schedules, detailed tracking, even medical examinations to preserve quality. Older women reassigned as servants, mothers of sons given elevated rank, a perverse incentive that rewarded breeding with privilege. Financial ledgers revealed the truth. This was not indulgence. It was state investment. Feeding, clothing, and transporting these women across continents consumed nearly 15% of imperial revenues, resources equal to maintaining whole cavalry divisions. This was not random brutality. This was rape industrialized, bureaucratized, optimized. The same genius that built a communication network from Korea to Poland created the most efficient system of sexual exploitation in human history. Every detail measured, every outcome tracked. Chinese chronicler Xiao Hong saw it firsthand. Auction blocks where generals bid for women with plunder taken from the same cities that had just been reduced to ash. A father's stolen gold used to purchase his stolen daughter. Irony weaponized as humiliation. But even 7,000 women were not enough for what came next. The year was 1202. The Tartars had poisoned Temujin's father decades earlier. The wound never closed. Now, with the Tartar Confederation defeated, the reckoning came. The order was simple, specific, methodical. Every Tartar male taller than a wagon axle, executed. 3 feet, a child's height. Every man and adolescent boy, slaughtered. Only infants spared, too young to remember their names, too small to carry vengeance. But the women, they were distributed like rations, not chaotically, but systematically. Elite warriors received the youngest, common soldiers the older, each according to rank. This was not a breakdown of discipline, it was discipline weaponized, rape not as accident, but as command. Witnesses described the scenes. Tartar women forced to watch as their husbands were executed, daughters torn from mothers, sisters separated, assigned to different units. Isolation multiplied the trauma. And the horror had a purpose. Genghis Khan wanted the Tartar bloodline to survive, but only through Mongol fathers. Every womb became a weapon, every child born a dilution of Tartar identity, ethnic cleansing by forced pregnancy. The logistics were as meticulous as the massacres. Pregnant women marked, monitored, resistance punished with public execution, examples staged to break the will of thousands. What modern prosecutors would call genocide through biology, the Mongols practiced with precision. The Tartars did not submit quietly. Many women leapt into rivers, from cliffs, choosing death over submission. The Mongols adapted. Guards posted at night, hands bound to prevent suicide. Even death, they decided, was a privilege denied.
Even death became a privilege denied. A single survivor's account, preserved in Chinese records, describes the sounds of that first night. Thousands of women's voices rising together. Grief, pain, rage. The Mongol camp stretched for miles, and from every direction came the evidence of systematic assault. By dawn, an entire culture had been violated. What happened in those tents reshaped warfare forever. Earlier conquerors had killed or enslaved. The Mongols innovated something worse: biological absorption. They did not want to merely eliminate their enemies, they wanted to digest them, transform them, replace their identity with Mongol blood. The Tatar campaign became the prototype, a procedure repeated across the empire's expansion. Local women gathered, evaluated, distributed. Resistance brought public rape followed by execution, a demonstration designed to terrify survivors. Compliance meant survival, but survival only as breeding stock. The Mongols recorded everything. Military logs counted not only horses and weapons, but women distributed after each victory, as if they were rations. One general even boasted in official chronicles of receiving 40 Tatar virgins as his share. And the cruelty went beyond flesh. Mongol soldiers taunted women about their murdered husbands and children. During assaults, they forced captives to chant Mongol phrases, to thank their rapists, to praise Genghis Khan. Physical domination was not enough. They demanded spiritual submission. The Tatars were only the beginning. Each new campaign refined the system. Ratios of women to soldiers calculated, suicide prevention measures enforced, distribution methods perfected. Sexual violence was transformed into military science. The long-term impact was exactly what Genghis intended. Within a single generation, Tatar identity dissolved. Children of rape were raised as Mongols, taught to revere the man who had destroyed their people. Mothers watched their own sons grow into the instruments of their culture's erasure. Modern DNA confirms what survivors testified. Y chromosome markers reveal demographic collapse across former Tatar regions. Local bloodlines erased, replaced by Mongol genetics. Science today validates what history whispered: an entire people bred out of existence. And this was only practice. The opening act of a sexual holocaust that would engulf half the known world. Stand, turn, live, or die. Those words decided fate in 7 seconds of inspection. After each conquest, survivors described the same ritual: the selection. Women and girls herded into central squares, arranged in lines, inspected like livestock at market. But this was not chaotic looting. It was systematic extraction of human resources.
The protocol was strict. First, stripped of clothing and jewelry. Nakedness prevented hidden weapons and displayed bodies for evaluation. Age came next. Girls under 7 were usually killed. Too young for immediate use, too costly to raise. Women over 40 faced the same fate unless they possessed rare skills like medicine. The useful range, ages 8 to 35. Physical beauty mattered, but was not the only measure. Clear skin, straight teeth, symmetry, examinations for disease, deformity, or pregnancy. Virgins carried premium value, their status verified through invasive inspections. Noble daughters were identified quickly: soft hands, elegant posture. These girls were marked for political use, gifts for allies, bargaining tools, rewards for loyalty. Sometimes politics outweighed beauty. But to be selected was no salvation. High scorers became private property: generals, officers, elite warriors. Lower scorers condemned to collective ownership in the military brothels. Either path ended in the same reality: systematic rape, forced pregnancy, cultural annihilation, early death. The process itself was psychological torture: women forced to walk, turn, pose under jeers and crude assessments, mothers torn from daughters, sisters separated forever.
sometimes forced to compete against one another, each hoping to appear more valuable than the other. The Mongols knew humiliation prepared the mind for violation. One Persian chronicler described Samarkand. 40,000 women gathered in the city square. Officers moved among them for 3 days. Those not selected were marched beyond the walls. The screams that followed told their fate. The arbitrariness was deliberate. No one knew why one woman was spared, another condemned. Confusion shattered resistance. Gratitude replaced dignity. Survival itself became submission. The rejected faced 3 fates: immediate execution, their bodies left as warnings; assignment to the lowest soldiers for unlimited abuse until death; or placement in the comfort stations that trailed baggage trains, serving hundreds until broken. And the chosen? They entered a hierarchy of hell.
Different conditions, identical dehumanization. Temporary holding pens, human warehouses, awaited distribution, women sorted by score, ethnicity, and destiny. Guards kept order, prevented suicides, prevented escape. Some captives tried to make themselves undesirable, cutting their faces, breaking teeth, rubbing filth into wounds. The Mongols responded with collective punishment, an entire group beaten or starved for one woman's defiance. The message was clear. Survival meant compliance. And yet, among these lines of despair, one girl would change everything. A Tangut princess, 17 years old, Girbal. Beautiful even through her attempts to hide it, defiance smoldering in her eyes despite the fear. When the stylist scratched her score, 98 out of 100, her fate was sealed. She was destined for the Khan himself.
When the evaluator marked his sheet, her score was written as 98. Almost perfect. Destined for Genghis Khan himself. Girbal, the Tangut princess, watched her sisters dragged away by soldiers. She heard her mother's screams from the rejection zone, but she survived the selection, condemned to the Khan's collection. Her journey beginning toward the tent where 3 years later she would carry a hidden knife. These beauty parades revealed the Mongol paradox, an empire capable of organizing conquest across continents, yet reducing women to tools of humiliation. Sophisticated systems enabled primitive brutality. Efficiency itself became evil. Bureaucracy turned into industrial-scale suffering. And among those thousands paraded stood one girl with nothing left to lose. The Mongol Empire's postal stations, the famed Yam system, symbolized its genius. From Korea to Eastern Europe, couriers rode fresh horses, ate hot food, and received shelter. But hidden in this infrastructure was something far darker: the world's most extensive network of state-managed sexual slavery. Every major station contained what Chinese records politely called comfort houses, planned facilities built to standard specifications,
dormitories for captive women, receiving rooms for soldiers, administrative offices for record-keeping, architecture designed for exploitation. The system worked with corporate precision. Station masters kept ledgers of available women, their origins, conditions, even their status. Soldiers presented tokens that determined their access based on rank. Payment was unnecessary. This was a state service fully funded by the imperial treasury. To prevent escape networks, women were rotated constantly. A Russian captive might serve in Mongolia, while Mongol women were sent to Persia. Displacement broke languages, broke cultures, broke hope. The ledgers still chill the blood. Daily tallies record how many soldiers used each woman, which were pregnant, which had died. Human suffering reduced to infantry management. Station masters faced quotas. Too many deaths? Investigations. Too few services? Accusations of inefficiency. The solution? Work women literally to death while keeping just enough alive to sustain demand. Calculated cruelty, optimized suffering. The age of victims sank lower with time. Early stations exploited women from 15 to 35. At the empire's peak, manifests list girls as young as 7. Younger victims lasted longer under abuse, a grotesque economic calculation. Medical care existed, but only to preserve utility. Mongol doctors treated infections not for mercy, but to protect soldiers. Pregnant captives were monitored, their children seized for military training or future distribution. Generational slavery became institutionalized. Each dot on the map represented not just horses and food, but dozens of broken lives. The scale defies comprehension. Scholars estimate at least 50,000 women trapped in the postal station system at its height. And that number excludes temporary stations, military encampments, and occupied cities, which operated similar networks without records.
Transport between stations was its own horror. Women crammed into wagons like cargo, chained together, fed little, afforded no privacy. Many died en route. Their bodies were dumped along the Silk Road, losses recorded like spoiled merchandise. Control was absolute. Women who resisted faced public torture. Those who obeyed received small privileges. An extra blanket, slightly more food. Hierarchies of suffering turned victims against each other, making them complicit in their own exploitation. Some stations even specialized. Near Karakoram, one housed only virgins for visiting dignitaries. In Persia, another was reserved exclusively for pregnant women. In China, a training facility prepared younger girls for service. Industrialized rape required specialization. And this system was not isolated. It connected to military brothels, urban comfort houses, private harems, all linked through the same infrastructure that carried messages and troops. Women became another commodity moving along imperial trade routes. The Mongols even created audits. Inspectors traveled between stations, investigating unusual death rates, ensuring quotas were met. Manuals outlined best practices for managing sexual slavery. Bureaucracy enabling atrocity. Local populations bore the cost. Villages were forced to provide annual tributes of girls. Failure meant collective punishment. Parents faced impossible choices: sacrifice their daughters or see their entire communities destroyed. And at the very heart of this machine sat the Khan's mobile court. Each tent a marker of conquest. Each woman a living trophy. From Chinese beauties to Persian princesses to Russian nobles, female flesh mapped the geography of empire. Today, 16 million men carry Genghis Khan's Y chromosome. Science confirms what chronicles whispered. This was no accident. It was biological warfare through systematic rape. The Mongols understood heredity long before genetics. They knew children resembled parents, traits carried in bloodlines. They weaponized this primitive knowledge into policy. Erase enemies not by extermination, but by replacing their lineage with Mongol seed. The arithmetic was horrifyingly simple. One soldier could impregnate dozens yearly. Multiply by hundreds of thousands of men over decades of conquest. Add the nobility's exclusive access to thousands more. The result was continental transformation. But the goal was not only numbers, it was erasure.
enemy aristocracies targeted deliberately. Noble lines would survive only through Mongol fathers. Chroniclers described it with chilling poetry, watering foreign fields with Mongol rain. For the women, pregnancy was not the end, but the beginning of lifelong exile. They could never return to their people. Their children were living marks of violation, proof written in blood.
Their children carried the curse of two worlds, too Mongol for their mother's people, too foreign for the Mongols themselves. Living contradictions, genetic weapons that exploded across generations. The empire managed it all with cold precision. Pregnant captives were herded into special camps, given better food and shelter, not from compassion, but to guarantee healthy offspring. Miscarriages were investigated, sometimes punished. Wombs became state property. The children of rape were processed like assets. Boys with strength entered Mongol military training. Girls were raised for future distribution into the empire's endless system of slavery. The next generation of soldiers and concubines was bred from conquered bodies. The demographic impact was devastating. In regions of Central Asia, entire pre-Mongol male bloodlines virtually vanished. Mongol Y chromosomes replaced them. Genetic studies confirm what chronicles whispered, a reproductive event unparalleled in human history. Modern DNA analysis shows that 8% of men across former Mongol territories carry identical markers from the conquest period. In some areas, the figure rises to 30%. Millions of assaults preserved in living genetic code. But the conquest went deeper than biology. It reshaped culture. Children born of rape often gained privileges denied to pure natives. Chances to join administration, access education, escape poverty. A perverse incentive emerged. Some women sought Mongol partners, hoping their children would at least have futures. The Mongols exploited this cruelty. Half-Mongol offspring were placed above native children, but always below pure Mongols. These in-between populations became tools of empire, enforcing their father's power against their mother's people. Infrastructure supported it all. Systems tracked paternity, inheritance, and births. Mothers were monitored like livestock. Killing a Mongol child, even when conceived through rape, brought death to entire families. Pregnancy itself became psychological warfare. Every child born to a conquered woman was a reminder of defeat. Living symbols of violation, speaking the local tongue, but carrying conqueror's blood. Trauma etched into biology, hereditary and inescapable. Even nursing was weaponized. Women who bore children were forced to breastfeed them, binding them in unwanted maternal ties. Refusal meant torture. The empire twisted the most natural instinct into a chain. Some women sought terrible escapes. Secret herbal abortions, infanticide disguised as accidents, suicide that carried unborn children with them. The empire answered with collective punishments. Entire villages suffered for the resistance of one mother. The genetic conquest succeeded beyond imagination. From Korea to Eastern Europe, millions today still carry proof of it in their DNA. The Mongol genetic bomb detonated 8 centuries ago, and its shockwaves remain in the blood of nations. And yet these numbers pale beside what happened in the year 1223. 4,000 girls. The youngest only 7, the oldest 15. All were lined up in a public square. The Oirat Confederation had resisted Mongol expansion, siding with the Khan's enemies. When they finally fell, Genghis Khan demanded a punishment so monstrous it would echo for generations. Every Oirat girl of the chosen age range was seized. Soldiers swept through camps, dragging daughters from their mother's arms. It took 3 days, carried out with deliberate, methodical precision. This was atrocity as performance. The captives were marched to Kyallik, the Oirat capital. Before the entire population, Oirat and Mongol alike, they were arranged in rows, perfect order. Chaos would have dulled the message. Genghis Khan himself addressed the crowd. Through translators, he announced their fate. The men would die, knowing their bloodlines ended. The women would watch their daughters destroyed. The children would serve the empire that annihilated them. Parents were offered a choice that wasn't a choice. Submit completely, and the girls would merely become slaves. Resist and they would be tortured to death. Most collapsed, begging for mercy that would never come. The calculation was perfect. Parental love became the weapon that broke resistance. What followed was public, systematic, and drawn out. The 4,000 girls were divided among military units. Platforms were erected so no one could look away. Families were forced to watch as mass violation began in full view. The logistics revealed the planning: holding areas, guard rotations, medical teams. This was not chaotic looting, it was organized terror prepared for weeks. Parents who rushed forward were cut down, others held at sword point. The sounds, thousands of young voices in pain, carried for miles. Soldiers rotated in shifts, the atrocity continued for days. The purpose was not just physical violation, it was spiritual annihilation. Parents forced to witness their children's torture, forced to choose between silence and death. Love itself turned into an instrument of cruelty. 2 girls died during the assault. Their bodies were displayed as warnings while the atrocity continued around them. The Mongols even presented this as mercy. Only 2 deaths among 4,000, proof, they claimed, of their restraint. But survival became its own torment. After the public demonstration, the girls were distributed according to standard practice. But they carried a permanent stigma, branded as Oirat rebels' daughters. A mark that condemned them to harsher treatment than others, their suffering prolonged for years. The atrocity at Kyalik was no accident. It was deliberate theater, a performance of power carved into the memory of an entire people.
The Oirat girls carried their curse across the empire. Their origin marked them for harsher treatment. Their very identity became a death sentence that followed them everywhere. Many were assigned to the lowest military units, especially the foreign auxiliaries. The Mongols reveled in the irony: Oirat daughters serving soldiers from other conquered peoples. Layer upon layer of humiliation, designed to maximize suffering across cultural boundaries. The 2 who had died during the public atrocity were in truth the fortunate ones. Survival meant years of systematic abuse. The youngest, children of 7 and 8, were kept until they reached useful age. They grew up knowing only sexuality, their innocence erased before it ever formed. The Mongols had stolen not only their childhood, but their very identity. The Oirat people never recovered. Their population collapsed, their culture fragmented. Survivors scattered instead of rebuilding, carrying trauma that echoed through generations. The atrocity had worked exactly as intended. It proved that resistance meant not just death, but collective defilement. Other tribes learned the lesson. When Mongol banners appeared on the horizon, cities surrendered without a fight. The memory of the 4,000 became a single phrase whispered across the steppes: absolute submission, or absolute horror. The psychological warfare succeeded completely. The Mongols discovered that public sexual violence could paralyze resistance more effectively than military defeat. And yet, they weren't finished. What began as brutality would evolve into something darker. At the siege of Urgench, the Mongols perfected their system, turning assault into scientific torture. Each conquered culture added a new method to their growing repertoire. They collected atrocity techniques like they collected tribute. From Chinese military texts, they learned about timing. Immediate assault created one kind of trauma. Delayed assault, after days of fear, created another. They experimented with intervals like scientists with test subjects. From Persia came chemical knowledge. Substances that prolonged pain, prevented wounds from healing, warped the body in specific ways. The Mongols folded this knowledge into their assaults, turning ancient medicine into modern torture. Red-hot iron was just the beginning. They discovered that physical trauma alone had limits.
Bodies adapted, minds escaped into dissociation. So they layered the horrors. They forced family members to participate. Mothers choosing which child would die. Fathers choosing which daughter would be violated first. They created hierarchies where victims harmed each other for scraps of survival. They pioneered sensory assault. Some women kept in darkness for days, only to be brutalized under blinding light. Others endured endless noise, the screams of other victims, Mongol war chants, the sound.
Loved ones tortured. Every sense weaponized to prevent escape. Temperature itself became a tool. Women left naked in freezing winds before assault. Others thrown into desert heat, dehydrated until their agony multiplied. The Mongols mapped how climates shaped suffering and adjusted tactics by region. From steppe traditions came animal involvement, war horses trained for cruelties, dogs unleashed to terrorize and control. The fusion of human and beast created primal fears no culture could resist. Even mutilation was turned into language. Orifices sewn shut, limbs marked, bodies transformed into messages that screamed, "This is what resistance earns." The empire communicated through flesh. Brutality turned into public texts that needed no translation. Execution methods were crafted for sexual crimes. Women who killed their rapist's child were tortured in ways meant to mirror the act. Those who resisted became examples, mutilated in ways designed to terrify. The punishments were cataloged, standardized, passed to new recruits like training manuals. Even faith was not spared. Rape was forced in temples, in sacred places. Victims ordered to blaspheme, curse their gods, and praise Genghis Khan. They knew that destroying belief multiplied trauma beyond the body.
The documentation system evolved as well. Later Mongol records described techniques, sequences, victim responses. They created torture manuals written like technical specifications. Brutality, bureaucratized. But the psychological cruelty surpassed even the physical. Mothers ordered to choose between children. Fathers forced to watch, powerless. Mercy turned into a weapon. Every choice led to horror. They created delayed consequences. Women told compliance would save their families, only to see them killed anyway. Others promised freedom, only to have hope crushed repeatedly. Trust itself became another instrument of torment. Children were weaponized. Young sons forced to watch their mothers violated, then serve the perpetrators. Daughters used to control mothers. Mothers used to control daughters. Family bonds transformed into chains of shared torture. Even healing was twisted. Mongol doctors treated wounds not for mercy, but to keep victims alive longer, fit for repeated use. Medical knowledge perverted into tools of prolonged suffering. And yet, amid this machinery of cruelty, one story rose above the ashes. A single concubine who refused to be broken. She was 16 when her city burned, 19 when she decided to kill a god. Princess Gerbil of Tengut. She watched from palace walls as Mongol armies encircled Yunchuan. Her father, Emperor Xianzong, had allied with Genghis Khan's enemies, a fatal mistake. The siege dragged for 6 months. By its end, she had witnessed the death of everything she loved. Her brothers executed, their heads raised on spears. Her mother leaping from a tower rather than face capture. Gerbil herself was caught at the edge, dragged back by Mongol hands. In the selection that followed,
Her royal blood and extraordinary beauty sealed her fate. She scored 98 on their monstrous scale, nearly perfect. The evaluator noted her defiant eyes as a flaw, not knowing that this defiance would one day end an empire.
The journey to Genghis Khan's mobile court took weeks. Gerbil traveled in a wagon reserved for high-value captives, her wrists raw from bindings. She memorized the faces around her, knowing most would vanish into the Mongol machine, devoured, nameless, forgotten. She survived by clinging to one thought: revenge. Each night in the Khan's bed sharpened her resolve. Proximity to power revealed the truth. The terror of the world was an aging man, flesh bound by weakness, a body that wheezed and ached. The god who had crushed nations was still mortal. He could bleed. Gerbil played her role with precision, submissive but never broken, beautiful but never seductive. She learned enough Mongolian to understand commands, but not enough to seem dangerous. She became furniture in his tent, present, silent, invisible. From other concubines, she gathered knowledge drop by drop. Guard rotations, which nights the Khan drank himself numb, where the searches were thorough and where they were careless. Every detail added to the flood she was building. The dagger came from an unlikely source, an older concubine, a Jinn princess enslaved for 15 years, pressed it into Gerbil's hand during bathing. No words were spoken, only a glance, an understanding deeper than speech. The blade was thin, made for concealment, sharp enough to kill with a single stroke. It was Mongol forged, stolen from a guard, but Gerbil told herself it had been her mother's, a lie she needed for strength. She imagined her mother's hand guiding hers, steadying the strike. In darkness she practiced. Over and over she rehearsed the motion until her muscles remembered what her heart dared not. One chance, one cut. Weeks passed. The Khan grew weaker, exhausted by campaigns and illness. He spent more nights drunk, calling for women to dull his pain. Gerbil waited. The chance came during a thunderstorm. The Khan had drunk deeply, celebrating some petty victory. He called for her specifically. Her defiance had caught his eye that morning. The storm would mask sound. The guards, distracted by the downpour, would pay less attention. It was perfect. She hid the blade in her hair, braided into an ornate style no one dared disturb. Her hands shook as servants prepared her, but they mistook it for fear. Every step toward the Khan's tent felt like wading through deep water. She knew she would die, but first she would balance the scales. Not for the millions destroyed, no one act could erase that. But for her mother leaping from the tower, for her brothers' heads on spears, for 3 years of degradation. For one moment, the violator would be violated. The tent was thick with incense. The Khan reclined on silk cushions, eyes glazed with wine and age. He gestured lazily for her to come closer. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, silence pressed against her chest. She lowered herself beside him. Her hand slipped to her hair. The blade came free. For the Tangut, she whispered in perfect Mongolian. Steel flashed in candlelight. Powerless, the conqueror closed his eyes, confident, careless, unafraid, until pain split him open. 8 centuries later, women across Central Asia still veil their faces, still live in shadows shaped by that terror. The Mongol legacy did not end with armies retreating. It carved scars so deep they reshaped civilizations. Families embraced purdah, women hidden not just from strangers, but from cousins, uncles, neighbors. If the conquerors came again, hidden women might escape notice. Invisibility became survival, passed through generations until the origin was forgotten. Architecture itself adapted. Homes built with hidden rooms, false walls, escape tunnels. Cities redesigned with women's quarters sealed at their core. Urban landscapes became maps of trauma. Marriage ages plummeted. Girls wed at the first sign of menstruation. Better to be married than left exposed. Childhood ended in blood and chains. But the wounds were not just demographic, they were psychological. Entire regions developed collective trauma. Folktales whispered warnings of strange men. Lullabies contained escape instructions. Fear became a language, sung into children's ears before they could walk.
Honor killings took root in some cultures, better death than honor. Others invented brutal virginity tests, clinging to purity as a shield. The cure became its own disease. Language shifted. Words for rape, for violation, for shame, vanished. New euphemisms replaced them, so elaborate that violence became unspeakable. The unspeakable literally became unspeakable. Religions shifted too. New prayers begged for divine protection from sexual violence. Martyrs were made of women who chose death over submission. Entire saints' cults grew from atrocities. Public life fractured, men and women divided by invisible walls. Public spaces became male-only. Mixed gatherings disappeared, every interaction loaded with the shadow of past horrors. Economies adapted, dowries inflated, families desperate to secure safety for their daughters. Women's inheritance rights evaporated. Visibility became danger, invisibility, survival. The Mongol terror militarized sexuality so effectively that entire civilizations reshaped themselves to avoid another catastrophe.
Women's inheritance rights disappeared. Property ownership became dangerous, a signal flare to predators. Financial invisibility turned into survival. Even armies changed. Commanders drafted new protocols to shield civilian women. City walls were rebuilt with hidden chambers, sanctuaries where wives and daughters could vanish in an instant. The Mongol lesson was carved in stone. Military defeat meant systematic violation. And so protection came with imprisonment. For centuries afterward, women lost freedoms in the name of safety. The cure became its own disease. But the ultimate irony unfolded not in a fortress, not on a battlefield, but in Genghis Khan's own tent. The man who weaponized sexuality would die from it. The violator would meet justice at the hands of his final victim. Modern DNA provides the epilogue. 16 million men carry his Y chromosome today. Each genetic marker is a scar, proof of countless rapes, forced pregnancies, shattered families. Science has quantified atrocity. No conquest before or since matched the scope of Mongol sexual terror. It was systematic, organized, industrialized. It transformed not only populations, but entire possibilities for human life. And yet, on one storm-racked night in 1227, centuries of cruelty collapsed beneath a single hidden blade. Thunder drowned the sound as steel met flesh. Princess Gerbil's strike was perfect, rehearsed in darkness, sharpened by rage. The man who had terrorized continents gasped, not in pleasure, but in shock. Blood spread across silk sheets, black under candlelight. The most powerful man in history clutched at his groin, finding only ruin where his manhood once reigned. She did not flee. For 3 heartbeats, she stared into his eyes, watching them shift, confusion, to realization, to terror. The Khan who had ordered thousands of women silenced now screamed without sound. The violator. Violated. Every woman you destroyed. Every daughter stolen. Every mother broken. They send their regards through me. He reached for her with bloody hands, but she was already moving. Outside the storm raged. Guards huddled under cloaks, distracted by rain, unaware that their god-king was bleeding to death on silk. Gerbil ran. Through the maze of tents where entire peoples had been reduced to flesh. Chinese girls peeked from torn curtains. Persian women clutched half-starved children. Russian nobles sat in golden chains. They saw the blood on her clothes, and they understood. Some bowed, others wept. All remained silent. The river thundered below the cliff. Gerbil did not hesitate. She had fulfilled her purpose, the only purpose that had carried her through 3 years of degradation. Behind her shouts rose, the guards discovering their dying master. She whispered her last words into the storm. For the Tangut, for all of them, for my mother. And she leapt. The water was ice and stone. The current swallowed her whole, carrying her body into darkness. Days later, search parties would find her corpse, but by then, the damage had already been done. The great Khan was dead. His empire, though it would continue for generations, had begun to fracture. Inside the tent, he died as he lived, surrounded by the evidence of his atrocities. His final sight,
silk partitions dividing women by ethnicity, a living map of conquest staring back at him as he bled out. The man who built an empire on systematic rape died castrated by a teenage girl he enslaved. At dawn, his generals found him. The scene was unmistakable, but they lied. Official records claimed illness. Others said a hunting accident. They could not admit that the conqueror of nations had fallen to a woman's blade. Gerbil's body was burned without ceremony, her name stricken from records, but her story spread. Through the tents, through the brothels, through the postal stations, a whispered legend, the princess who killed the monster. The Mongol Empire marched on. The rapes, the brothels, the bureaucratic machine of cruelty, it all continued. But something had broken that night. Fear, once the Khan's greatest weapon, now cut both ways. If even he could bleed, then no tyrant was invulnerable. Every enslaved woman became a potential assassin. Every silent girl might one day carry a hidden blade. Genghis Khan's death ended one man's reign of terror, but the scars endure 8 centuries later. 16 million descendants are living proof, genetic echoes of organized atrocity. Each Y chromosome marker is a story of violation. Each child born from rape a reminder of conquest carved into bloodlines. The infrastructure outlasted him. Postal stations continued their triple services. Military brothels marched with the armies. The bureaucracy of rape churned on, too vast to stop at once. But Gerbil's blade left a message history cannot erase. Even absolute power has weaknesses. Even a system built on fear can collapse from within. Every enslaved woman carried the possibility of justice. Every brutalized girl hid the chance of rebellion. The Mongol sexual terror remains history's darkest chapter of organized cruelty. It showed how one man's wound could metastasize into the suffering of millions, how trauma, left to rot, can scar humanity itself. From Borte's kidnapping to Gerbil's revenge, the cycle of violence devoured generations. But in the end, it also destroyed its creator. Today, the echoes remain. Architecture built for hiding. Cultures obsessed with protecting women, genetic scars that map atrocity in blood. One man's campaign of sexual domination rewrote the human genome. And yet the tent is quiet now. The storm is past, but the thunder still echoes.